mind
My gavel.
Just a reminder to turn on your mics.
My gavel. I hope she doesn't hurt herself. I'm missing something. Nathan, are we ready down there? Poor thing. I should have got it. Thank you. Okay, are we ready?
Is Nathan ready?
Welcome, citizens and staff. I'm Mayor Kara Westfall. Call to order this council session, work session at 6 p.m. on Monday, June 7th, 2021, where we will be discussing the wastewater treatment plant project and wastewater treatment plant project update with Mark Wilrett.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I think before we get started, I would probably want to do a little bit of introductions with the team that we have here, if you'll allow me to do that. So I think I'll just let them go down the line, introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'm Steve Flett with Sladen Constructors. I serve in the role of design build manager.
I'm Kelsey Randall, and I'm the field engineer.
Jeff McCormick, I'm with Carollo Engineers, so I'm the project manager for the design team.
Andy McCaskill with HDR, we're the owner's representative.
Okay. Well, I was thinking back, it's been about 2 years, I think, since we did our last update pre-COVID. And as the title of the slide suggests, some things have changed in the project, project cost progression. So what we wanted to talk to you tonight about is some of the assumptions or presumptions we had starting going into the project a couple years ago, some of the things that have changed and where we're at right now. And I'll let the cat out of the bag, and it's not surprising, is yes, the costs that we're looking at have gone up since we last met with you. So I think what I will do after that introduction is I'll turn it over to Jeff, and he'll go walk you through some of the slides, and then of course we'll have lots of time for, hopefully, for some questions.
Yeah, so I'm just going to, again, like Mark said, kind of walk you through the progression from probably the kind of our original design. I think the last time, what'd you say, how many? 2 years ago. What has changed, kind of remind you of what we were talking about then, and then kind of what has changed since then and what we're looking at and kind of what we're talking about now. Okay, Nathan, you can go ahead. So I'm not going to really dig into the details of all of this on the slide right here, but when the project started, we engaged with DEQ. We had them come in. We had to kind of do an update and make some assumptions because your permit had not been issued yet. So we had been working with them trying to guess what is going to be in the permit, and we came up with a list of assumptions, and we designed based on those lists of assumptions. And these are the improvements that we identified at that stage, which was a new influent pump station, modifications to the existing aeration basin, a new aeration basin, new blowers, the magnetite recovery building. That's all part of the biomag process, which was kind of that innovative process that we've been looking at. The coagulant storage, which is part of that, some modifications to the existing clarifiers, and retrofitting of some existing tankage and adding a new dewatering building. So that was kind of the original, that's what was in the original design when we came to you last time. Okay, Nathan, I think we can go to the next slide.
Actually, hand you a clicker, and
Oh,
you're
okay,
just going to
yeah.
walk through it yourself.
Great, as long as I don't mess this up. So, yep, this is it. Okay, so this is just kind of showing what's under construction, what's under contract right now. So we moved forward with the new IPS, which is the influent pump station. That's where all the flow comes into the plant. And kind of the big stuff is taken out there, the 2x4s and stuff that might come down the pipeline. That we knew no matter what we did going forward, that was something that was going to have to be replaced. All the flow currently comes into the existing pump station and some existing what we call the headworks. All of those, the existing pump station, I believe, is from the 50s, and that's all that original stuff, which is kind of scary, and if that fails, you can't even get water out of there. So we all knew that had to be built, so that's what's under construction now. Additionally, the secondary clarifier 1, the mechanism in that was old and failing, so we're replacing that. That would happen no matter what we choose as kind of our discharge going forward. And a new dewatering building. Again, there's a temporary dewatering system there that's been there for probably 15 years or something. So we're putting in a new permanent dewatering system over closer to the compost to reduce to improve the performance, but also kind of reduce the manpower required to operate it. And then we're also doing what we call phase 2, which is some rehab work. Again, replacing some pumps that were vintage pumps, and along with that, doing some minor structural improvements to that building to hold up the new pumps that are going in there, and a new what we call 3-water pump system, which is the water it's the effluent from the plant that they actually reuse at the plant for different processes for spray down and things like that. So these are the things that are currently under construction, the phase 1 and phase 2 improvements. The final NPDES permit was different, had some different things in it than what we originally thought was going to be in it. And I've tried to highlight the ones that are kind of critical to what the design of the treatment plant will need to be to discharge to the river going forward. The two big ones that are different from what we originally worked on was that we now have a daily ammonia limit. Our original assumption, and the way many permits are written around the state, is that they just have a monthly permit. And what the issue with the daily permit is that means that you cannot have one day where you have an excursion. So we have to design the plant looking at flows on the very worst day of the year and design around that. And just for perspective, typically you have 3 MGD coming to the plant. On a peak day, we estimate you could have as much as 20 MGD coming through the plant. When we had the monthly permit, we assumed on those days that we wouldn't have to meet the ammonia permit, so it reduced the size of the facilities that we would have to build quite a bit. Now with the daily permit, we're looking at having a much more robust nitrification system that can handle those peak flows, finding a way to do that, and also more robust controls and things like that will have to be in place to make sure that you can meet that daily limit. So that's one thing that was not in there. The other, there's a couple other things. The excess thermal load, we always knew that there was going to be some sort of thermal limit. At the time when we did the original design, we did not know exactly what that was going to be, and none of us felt comfortable designing for that at that time, so we did not design anything at that time, which was a good thing because what came back kind of surprised us all, where your discharge is cool enough to discharge to the river at all times of the year except the very coldest times of the year. And that kind of has baffled us all, but it also means, again, and this is also true of the ammonia limit, is that in the coldest times of the year, when you have potentially your highest flows coming into the plant, you still have to meet these limits. So now the excess thermal load limit, once we saw how they were interpreting that and how we'd have to treat for that has changed a little bit, our thinking of how we would deal with that. So I'll talk a little bit about how we might take care of that. The other thing that came in is a very strict total residual chlorine limit. And that is something we didn't expect it to be quite that strict. Actually, if you read the limits in this table, that's actually below a detection limit So there's a footnote that says, actually, you only have to do it just a little higher than that to meet the actual detection limit. But again, this really strict limit is something that you guys can meet. It's just going to be probably a more robust control system, which is something that we're looking at right now. Possibly, it also could include some physical changes at the plant, but right now we're looking at some improved instrumentation and things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The last bullet on the list here was not in the permit, but as part of our design review, DEQ came back to talk to us and said that we had to make modifications to the existing disinfection, the chlorine contact basin, to meet what their current standards are for length to width ratio, which is going to address that, we have to do some structural changes within the existing chlorine contact basin. The current one is just an old tank, circular tank. It comes up in the middle and goes out over the sides. And they want something that is long and goes back and forth, so we have to add baffles within that tank to do that. So those are the major things that have changed. And what is really challenging with your plant and looking at options going forward, I'll just lay this out there, is the excess thermal load limit and the ammonia limit, that peak day, and especially the peak day in the winter. How we address that, that's kind of driving the cost on a lot of these things and driving some of these improvements that we're going to talk about. So with the changes in the NPDES permit and some of the stuff and also the chlorine contact basin modifications, this is what the new our new take on what the plant might have to look like to discharge to the river, and I'll walk through kind of the blue stuff is all the changes to what we were talking about. So one thing we're looking at is doing flow equalization. Again, to treat these peak flows, sometimes it's easier just to build a big tank and hold the flow for a day or a half a day, and then you don't have to build your treatment plant for 20 MGD. You can build it for 5 or 10 MGD, as long as you can store the rest of it. So that's what the flow equalization would be for. Before, we were showing 1 new aeration basin, and now we're looking at 2 and possibly 3 aeration basins. This is, again, because during the peak flow, we still have to meet this nitrification requirement. So simple way of putting it is we have bugs that take out the ammonia and the nitrogen. We need to store a lot of these bugs at the plant. We need to store much more of them to treat that peak day load, even though it's not always constantly coming through. So that's kind of why we need the new, may need new aeration, or we need at least 2 new aeration basins and possibly a 3rd. And the reason that we're a little unsure and we're hedging our bets on that is because A, it's a very tricky limit to meet, and B, you guys have not had to do it, and you have not had to operate in this nitrification mode, so we don't know exactly how the plant will perform. We've been gathering a lot of data on that, and we're beginning to understand it, but we just want to be, honest with you, not say it's going to be 2 and come back as 3. So we're kind of hedging ourselves a little bit there. And then the other things that are included would be cooling towers. Previously, when we first got those thermal load limits, we looked at a bunch of options. Wetlands, we're going to talk about reuse later. But what looked like it was the most cost-effective way to meet the temperature limits was to actually add cooling towers, which ironically is the last thing that DEQ wants you to do, but that is what is most cost-effective, or what looked like it at that time. And then then again, the CCB modifications and repairs, and the dechlorination improvements, which I already talked about. So there's a number of things that have changed there, and as Mark alluded to, this will drive up the cost. Oh, it's really ugly on this screen. I apologize. The red is everything, are all the adders to what we had previously thought was in there. So again, flow equalization, that's in the $2 million range. aeration basin. Each aeration basin is about 5.9 million. We have the two columns, and the only difference between the two columns is whether we're doing 2 or 3 aeration basins, just so you have a range of costs there for that. And then the secondary effluent pumps, cooling towers, CCB modifications. Well, the effluent pumps and the cooling towers are both for the temperature, so that's another 4.5 million to deal with the temperature limit. Then the CCB modifications and the chlorine residual improvements. We talked about those already a little bit. And the blower building modifications. The blowers are another thing. The low ammonia limit, removing ammonia takes a lot of air. And so depending on that, we may have to add another blower. And right now, to save costs, we're using an existing building to put all the blowers in. If we start adding more blowers, there's a potential that that building may have to be expanded, or we may have to find another place to put blowers. So there is a little bit of a range of costs there for those as well. And then the last line item is the site piping. That's Steve could talk more about how we kind of do our cost estimates, but you know, as we add more tankage, there's more site piping to get to and from all those tankages, and that's, you know, a little bit of an allowance there. So bottom line is the construction total is now, for going to the river, we estimate to be somewhere between 53.5 to $64 million. That is in addition to what is currently under contract. I have a slide at the end because I know it's going to get confusing. That's not in addition to what we originally estimated. It's in addition to what's already under contract. So at the end of this, we'll have like an apples to apples of the differences. I think you guys have been brought up to speed somewhat on the discussions with KDD and the potential for doing reuse down there. This is one that sounds like a great idea. And I'm going to talk about I don't know if it's a best case scenario, but I'm going to talk about, so the process that we went through is we talked to KDD about this plan, learned a lot about their system, where the water's coming and going, and prepared a report for DEQ because this is something that DEQ has never done before. So we prepared a report with our take on, this is our plan, this is how we would get water down there, they say they can take it all, and this is what they would do with it different times of the year. And this is how we interpret, you know, what we think the discharge requirement should be, which we assumed going to Class A reuse water, which is, you know, the highest class you can get. They can use it for any crops. What Class A doesn't require, and you hear me talking about nitrification all the time, and I'm sorry if that's getting boring, but it doesn't require nitrification, right? Nitrification is removing all the nitrogen from the wastewater, and they actually want that. They actually want, you know, some of the nutrients there. So if it's true Class A reuse water and that's all we need to discharge, these are what the improvements will be. I will say, we submitted this report to DEQ and we've had some subsequent conversations with them, and they are interpreting certain things differently than we would have. And the way they are interpreting it currently, and we're still working with them on this, but they're basically saying that the irrigation ditch at KDD, their North Canal, is a water of the state, and we're going to get the same limits. You're going to have to get an NPDES discharge permit to discharge to that drainage ditch, and it's going to have the same limits as what you have going to the river, which doesn't make a lot of sense to some people, but that's the way they're interpreting it. So right now, they're saying, and Andy, I can't remember what it's called, but the uses of the canal, they're saying, are the exact same as the uses for the river: swimming, aquatic life, everything. So it would all have to be treated in temperature. And because, and I don't know how much you guys know about KDD and how they manage, but they do discharge back to the Klamath from the straight strain at different times of the year. And so because it's going back to the river, this is the conversation we're having with them now. And Mark and Andy can talk more about some of the efforts of all the groups we're talking to about that, trying to come to a common sense solution. So we can talk more about that later, but I just wanted to kind of throw out kind of what we were thinking at the time, which was just doing Class A. This is what it would cost to do Class A and get it down to KDD, right? So there was going to be some improvements at the plant, and then the other big cost, but there's less improvements at the plant, actually, because we don't have to do all the aeration basins and the blower improvements. We still have to do a new aeration basin, but that's more to address the fact that we need to get rid of your primary clarifiers and your digesters because the structures are failing. And that's the most cost-effective way to do it. So we would do, I'm trying to remember what the next slide is. Well, next slide, I'll walk you through it. So the kind of improvements that we're looking at, we would still do this equalization basin that I was talking about because, again, you have a peak flow of 20 MGD. We need all the water to go to KDD at all time. We want to get out of the river. That was the goal. Your pipeline that goes to cogen currently and that pump station are currently designed for 10 MGD. So we assumed that we could take up to 10 MGD down to KDD at any time. As you get into the design, you might refine that down or whatever and kind of do the balancing between equalization. But you would end up with a 5 million gallon equalization basin. And you could basically take 10 MGD down to KDD on peak days. Then we would not have biomag anymore. We would not need that, but we would need one new aeration basin. So without the biomag, that also means we don't have to do this coagulant storage. There was a secondary clarifier 2 mechanism replacement that had to do with biomag, so there's a couple things that go away there. But then we do have to add a 10 MGD filtration facility, and then the pump station and the reuse pipeline, and that's where, you know, a lot of the costs you're going to see are. And I'm going to go to the next slide, and it's probably going to be that bright red that you can't read again. So again, we have the equalization basin in there. The tertiary facility is what, 5.1, I think, if I'm reading that correctly. And again, each aeration basin was $6 million, so you're trading an aeration basin for a filtration facility. The big cost there for doing reuse, though, is the conveyance cost, and that's $11.7 million. And our assumption was that we're reusing the pipe to cogen, basically, and then building a pipe from cogen down to the North Canal is what the plan was. So reusing as much infrastructure as we could. So then, again, construction total for that is $49.3 million. And that is, again, in addition to what we're currently under contract.
Does that imply not sending effluent to the cogen anymore?
No, we would still do that.
Okay.
After you send it to cogen, you would then send it down.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. So it
And-
wouldn't come back to the plant. We would go from the cogen plant on down.
The
Okay.
plan would hopefully be not to take it back to the plant.
Yeah.
There is a question, that was one of our questions or our concerns with DEQ is whether is kind of, are they going to treat the stuff coming out of cogen differently than stuff coming out of the plant? But the plan was no, cogen could peel off whatever they wanted and then take it and put it back in the pipeline when they were done with it. So this, again, is just kind of going back to your question about cost, what we're looking at for cost. The table at the top is everything that's currently under contract, which is $35 million. The near-term costs are our best estimates of the things that have to happen in the next 5 years. And these are driven by Again, the permit has a compliance period for the nutrients and the temperature. So this is reflecting, and it also has milestones in there for doing a new facility plan and getting preliminary design reports in and things like that. So the near-term improvements, the only thing that's really a construction project here is going to be the dechlorination improvements. I'm trying to remember, Andy, is that 2023? Is that when the compliance is? The end of 2023?
Construction for dechlor, yeah.
Yeah. And again, the stuff for the dechlor, we just submitted a report on that to DEQ and got comments back. We have a kind of a stepwise plan for meeting that, which is, A, we're going to try and just do it with some minor instrumentation. But then there's also, we're going to do some testing. We built some time in the schedule to make sure that that's working. And if it's not, there may have to be some modifications, but it's not a complete redo or a new facility. It would be moving a pipe and moving a chlorine injection point. But so that 550, I think, includes kind of the worst case scenario of what that dechlorination cost, construction cost is going to be. So those are, and then we need to do the facility plan that says how we're meeting all the new permit limits, preliminary design report, and then final design so that we get everything on board by, or up and running by 2030 or 2035. I can never remember. There's one for temperatures 2 years before the nutrients, I believe.
Yeah, 2029 for the nutrients, 2035 for temperature.
And so that's, and then on top of all those costs would be the long-term costs, which are the ones that I just presented, the construction costs that I just presented down at the bottom. And again, all of those costs have been from relatively high-level look at it. We haven't done any detailed design so that these guys could do detailed takeoffs of all these cost estimates. So we have, with, is that 5 stars next to it, the expected accuracy range. But that's, and it varies a little between the two just because there are some facilities that we had pretty well designed, so we know how much they were going to cost, so we've kind of reduced the contingencies there. And some other ones where we're maybe it's a little bit more of an unknown, like the cooling towers, we have quotes from vendors and stuff. But so we have, that's why there's kind of a different expected accuracy range in those, just based on what facilities we already had designed or what we know about. But it is, for both of them, it is still a fairly big range just because we're at pretty high level planning. And that is all I had, but I'm assuming there will be questions on all of this stuff, so.
Councilman Toffel.
I guess I'll start. I'll tell you what my feelings are. With the water crisis we're having and everything, and I don't see it getting a lot better, I really think we need to get out of the river and discharge that water to the drainage system so they can use it for, you know, I know it's minuscule for what they use, but it's something. And I just see DEQ changing the rules on the river every time they turn around. I might be wrong, maybe this is their final one.
I think one of the concerns on that is we,
You know, I find it absolutely absurd that they want to apply the same rules for dumping into the river as you do a canal. I mean,
we were all relatively surprised by that, I would say.
that's a kind word.
yeah.
Well, we try not to be too sarcastic. But yeah, what DEQ is really comfortable with, what they know is putting in a pipeline and taking it directly to a golf course or a farm, not discharging to a drainage ditch. So that's what they're comfortable for, and that's kind of what they would push us to do, I believe. Which is still a possibility, maybe with KDD. I don't know, but it's not, not the ideal situation. And again, to really make reuse work, or to really pay off for you guys, we have to be able to do it in the winter. And like the refuge was somebody who would take the water in the winter. They would flood fields in the winter, so they have some, beneficial reuse in the winter.
Yeah, having to, if we don't have a place to put it in the winter, that means we have to store it. And that was going to add another, I think we were looking at between $35 to $40 million to have enough storage to be able to to set it down. So, and that again, KDD said that they could irrigate year round, but because that water makes its way back to the straight strain and then eventually back to the river, we'd be looking at some of those, the NPDES compliance costs. We'd have to be meeting those requirements there. And on top of that, we still have to build the conveyance pipeline, which was at $11 million. So it becomes very expensive unless we can figure out a way to get that water into KDD and not have to do an NPDES permit. So a couple things going forward is, so that obviously you can tell us what.
Counselor Blaine.
Sorry, just before we get off that subject, I had a quick question. You mentioned with the going back into the river, is it KDD has no process when it gets to them to clean it at all, to make it any cleaner?
No. They take it, they're just a distribution network, really.
Mhm.
Just, yeah, put it out in their ditches to all the
And
farmers.
that's
They don't
not-
do any
and-
treatment at all.
I'm guessing that's not a possibility, but is that something that's been discussed?
I don't, it has not been discussed, and I'd have to think about that one. And I'm trying to remember, do they have some sort of discharge permit to go back to the river? I felt like DEQ said something about that at some point.
I think the issue is they may need, they're going to be subject to the temperature piece as well. This gets confusing with federal law because ag is exempt from the Clean Water Act, which is where the NPDES gets its authority. And there were some lawsuits if the river or if the canal is indistinguishable from the river, then they shouldn't have any impact to
No,
them.
absolutely,
But I think the courts said, well, maybe it's indistinguishable, but it's not quite indistinguishable. So there's some issues for KDD as well. I know they're not dealing with the nitrogen at all. I think they're just looking at a
Yeah.
temperature issue.
Having a water law background is like that, definitely well versed in what the issues could be. But my thought is, particularly now with the water issues, this is a time for innovation. And so is this something we can explore?
I couldn't agree more. We've had this conversation multiple times, is we have a product that we'd like to get rid of. We have people who wants the product, and we have a hurdle of an agency that's telling us that you can't use that product based off of how we interpret whatever rules or laws they have. So two things going forward. Obviously, we're not going to solve this tonight or within the next week, but a couple of avenues that we're looking at right now. One is another discussion with DEQ, and again with the same comment that if we could find a win right now, boy, everybody would be singing DEQ's praises if we could find out a way to get that water down to the irrigators. And there's also the potential in the near future that we might be working with South Suburban again. We'll see what that looks like, which would mean even perhaps more water. And so is there a way that we can take a look at the rules that are holding them back? I realize what they might say, but is there a way that we can take a look at it and find a way to interpret those rules in a way that works in your behalf? Now, obviously, it would take some time, but the equivalent for them would be an IMD, which is an internal management directive, the equivalent of an OAR or a policy that we would use. So it would help dictate that. So if we can find a way to make that work, that might help. So we're I'm going to meet with DEQ tomorrow. We're going to have that conversation. I'm sure we'll be the first of several, if not many. The other option that we're going to take another look at also is going back to reinjection into the ground. You can't reinject directly into the aquifer, but you can inject above the aquifer and then let it basically work its way down and get back into the groundwater table, if there is a groundwater table. So there's one of the areas down by KDD, it sounds like they don't even have any groundwater, which sounds like that'd be a perfect place to discharge. There's some land we own that might be an option for us to discharge onto. So I don't know if it'll be coming, I don't know the cost yet, but I'm actually enlisting the help of a different consultant that actually specializes in groundwater recharge in this kind of an application, and to have them take a look at it. So that may be coming before you, more than likely it will, and should be any time here. So I'm just waiting for the proposal. And those are the two biggest ways we're looking at trying to get rid of the water right now. And I agree with Councilman Toffel that I think it makes the most sense to try to get out of the river. We were having this conversation, it's just the next permit cycle will be something else added to it, more than likely to be PFAS, the stuff we're dealing with out at the airport. Wouldn't surprise me if we see that in the very near future. And who knows, it could be pharmaceuticals the time after that. So it's just going to get harder and harder and harder. But we've got to find a place to get rid of the effluent first. So I think that's all I have for right now, if you have any other questions.
Councilman Andrews.
Yeah, I'm just, So I think KDD is the best place when I say everything I'm going to say. And I think the other thing too is it's time to start putting other type of pressures on DEQ on this one. So that's not going to be meetings with DEQ. That's going to be meetings with other political leaders in the state. And I think we should start a plan right now on that. Because today, if that was the headline, DEQ is holding up farmers from getting water, trust me, there'd be a lot of people with egg on their face and they would be figuring things out for us. So I think that's the time is now to act. Backup plan, I continue to look at $11 million to pipe it down to KDD, where you have a abandoned golf course across the street that could probably be purchased for a lot less than that, and purchased under the 11 million to pipe it down there and to pipe it to that golf course. And how many acre feet do we have to distribute through the entire year? Are there additional ponds that could be, or holding tanks could be put on that golf course that could be easily soaked into that water table you're talking about? That might be a solution too. So, and then that doesn't have this permit that we were required to do. I would love to see this water being used for our ag, bottom line. So that's my preference. And like I said, I'd rather do some pressure on that to see if we can loosen some people up on to have that happen. But I still think we should look at that golf course solution, because I know the city of Cottage Grove, that's how they get rid of their affluent water. And I still think that should be a backup plan for us. So that's my thoughts.
This may be a silly question, but for the winter discharge of the water, can't it just go right to and they send it to the refuge? Who hasn't been getting any water? I mean, what's wrong with sending water to the refuge in the wintertime? I mean, that's generally when most of the dumps and geese are there.
Yeah, that's definitely something we were talking about. We'd still have to build the pipeline to get it down there. And if they couldn't take it all, we have to work with California, because some of that goes into California. So now you're talking a different region of EPA and the California Water Quality Control Board. So we have two other entities we have to deal with. And the other problem that I don't know, well, I don't know if this has really come up too much in the conversation, but my understanding is that the refuge, to make sure that they keep their water clean, they also cycle some of their water back into the drain and then actually makes its way back into the river. So if we start to head down that direction, we got to make sure we have everything, all the ducks in a row. But that is definitely something we've talked about, is getting the water down to the refuge.
Federal Fish and Wildlife would be pretty excited.
Mm-hmm. The refuge was ecstatic about it. We had several meetings with them. They would love to have every last drop of the water. No, I couldn't agree more. I know.
I think one of the concerns we'll have to deal with the ag is that winter storage. If we have to build a reservoir at $30 to $40 million, that's also, so Mark and I have talked, there could be some combination of that groundwater recharge use. Once it goes into the ground, it comes out, if you pull it back out, it's just groundwater. There's no ties to it anymore. Assuming that as it goes through the Vados zone, which is the zone between where you put it in and where the water is, that it also cleans it up. So there's potential there, even potential to use some of it up at Moore Park. I mean, we're looking at our park this year. We generally get it out of the lake, but if we're using this, we could give that water right back in the years that ag gets just a little, we could give them that. So there are several things we're looking at. We do have that consultant coming down to help us look at that groundwater recharge. I think that would be less expensive than a reservoir, even if during the summer ag is using or somebody else is using it in the winter, maybe that's where we put it. And I don't know how, maybe that golf course we have to get into growing very, very water dependent trees, growing fast. I don't know, but there are other things you can do to try and reuse the water.
I know that we did that study years back about actually looking to go to Reams with our effluent, and the only problem we're running into is they would have loved to have had the effluent, but the salt concentrations were an issue, and they couldn't take enough of the water. We would have had to still store in the summertime. We were looking at them, Vets Park, the Memorial Park, all those places, because the pipeline runs right by every one of those. But the storage option would definitely be something you could.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, you guys need to study it. Can you build big enough ponds throughout that area that could let it soak into the natural river? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. But I think it's something to look at, and I think we've got some time right now. So let's look at it, and if it's a viable option, then we can consider it. If it's not, then I'll be quiet. I won't talk about it ever again.
No, it's definitely worth it. Again, since things have changed, it's definitely worth opening it back up again and at least dusting it off and seeing if it's still applicable. So where we go from here, we're going to wrap up the stuff we have under design, right under construction, I should say right now. We're looking for a couple, we have Sladen still on site. Are there some other things that we can get built that are going to be, we're going to use either way? So we already won't have to pay for mobilization to come back again. So we're taking a look at that. And then after that, it's probably going to be, we're going to have to pull off and do some more, it'll be more on the study side of things until we go back and then figure out what we're going to construct, so.
Tofel.
Just looking at the Reams property, not to use the water, to keep it as a golf course, but is there enough property there for storage or is it close?
Let's see, the first study we did back in the first master plan, or excuse me, facilities plan, said we needed about 2,700 acre feet. So, I don't know how big that area is. And then I think the last one we looked at it changed, and I can't remember. It was off at MGD, so
I know, I don't
700.
as much as I should, but it's basically you need to store for
3 months, 3 or 4 months.
all of everything that comes out of the plant for 3 months. That's why it's.
But yeah,
It's huge lagoon.
and it's a lagoon. It's not just building. We have to actually have to line that lagoon just like you would like something else or
That can't
landfill.
actually soak into the earth.
Even if it's Class A.
If it, I don't know the answer to that. I shouldn't say that. I know we've talked, typically you're applying it, not setting it up as a lagoon to actually go back into the aquifer itself from that point, but.
You can do that because they have those spreading zones. That's essentially what it would be doing. You would have to, that would be, so there's a state permit for the groundwater reuse as well as the ag reuse versus a federal permit. And that's what we're trying to get to. The last thing we had from DEQ was essentially you need an NPDES permit to go to Klamath drainage. It's no different than going into the river and you save the $13 million, 11.7 in piping. But if we can somehow figure out how to use that, build that's where we're hiring the hydrogeologist to come in who specializes in groundwater recharge. Are there places we could do that and make it work in a less expensive way, but also something maybe that becomes a benefit for the community? If you build a large group of ponds out there, maybe you put fish in them, let kids do bluegill and whatever. So there's some options.
I'll just tell you, I'm 100% committed to getting out of the river. So I think all of our efforts should be figuring out how to do that, because that is not our future, in my opinion. So as long as I'm sitting in one of these chairs, that's the direction that I would like us to go. And someone else can take my place and go a different direction, but as long as I'm here, that's what I want.
I won't be on council long enough to see this project done anyway, so, but that's, my opinion is we have to get out of the river. I don't know what they think.
Counselor Studenberg.
Yeah,
Any thoughts?
I agree with both these gentlemen. I think that's the future.
Counselor Dodson. Any thoughts?
You can disagree. It's allowed.
Oh, what's the path to, it feels like working with DEQ at the staff level is ending up with us getting everything we don't want. So how do we work at the next level up? Is that the county level? Is it state level? Is
It's,
it federal level?
it's probably state and federal.
We've already kind of started down this path with the regional solutions team, with Annette Liba, bouncing this off of her and trying to get into DEQs. So I think seeing, again, one more conversation, here's the way I'm seeing it right now, and this obviously could change, but starting local, and after that, it's going up to talk with Director Whitman, with whoever else we can find, and then at that point, it might even be going to their boss, which is their board, so the EQC. And after that, I don't know, but yeah, it's.
Yeah, well, I guess I feel like, right, as council, we haven't, I mean, I've sat through a few meetings, but we haven't proactively done anything to, one, because we don't know what to do, right?
Sure.
But we haven't practically done anything. I mean, I've sat in a meeting with I think the state DEQ, who said, which was kind of repeated here, the absolute last thing we're trying to achieve is a city wasting energy on chillers.
Mm-hmm.
And the permit shows up and the only option is chillers. Like, great. Like, how do we get to the level where the guy in charge says, this is the only thing we don't want, yet that's the only answer? Like, obviously, not obviously, can we influence somehow, and who do we need to be calling or writing letters to say, this just happened, right? Over the course of 3 years, we sat in meetings that said, we're gonna kick and scratch to do whatever, you don't have to do this. All that kicking and scratching is, well, you still have to do that. That's when we need to be playing at a different level. And not that you guys aren't doing the right things as staff, right? But we obviously need to be playing at a different level to get answers that we can even work with.
Couldn't agree
So
more.
if we could, yeah, I guess, let us know what to do.
I think a drive up to see Richard Whitman would be probably a good step.
Yeah. And just say, I mean, just, what do you want us to do here, right?
Yep.
I mean,
Nope. We'll definitely appreciate the help.
fire up the Trojan plant, the nuke plant again, so it can pay for our chillers? Like, what do you want? We're all in. It's crazy.
Counselor Blaine, would you like to, anything to add to
I
that?
support removing the effluent from the river also. And I would definitely support, first use would be ag use, but wildlife refuge and any other uses that we can, and maybe that's a combination of all three.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
being innovative and trying to figure this out, because it's not gonna get better. And like I said, DEQ is gonna have more stuff, and then there's a given with that, there'll be something, like you said, the airport, the I always forget
The PFAS, yeah.
yeah, we know that's coming,
Mhm.
and that's probably another permit that's coming. And that's groundwater, I believe it's soaked into the groundwater also. So, I would absolutely like to see us get out of the river.
The EPA did a survey of large municipal wastewater throughout the country, and 98% of them have PFAS in their discharge because it's ubiquitous in daily products that people use. So with that study and other things, I think the next big, when we talk at TMDL, it's going to be a PFAS TMDL, and how do you remove that? And frankly, pharmaceuticals, some of the heavy metals we see coming through the plant, studies I've seen, they come through multivitamins, right? They don't exist here. So those things will be coming down. At some point, there has to be a discussion about, return on investment. We'd be better going and frankly building a plant that just treats river water and removing things, because we get a whole lot more out of it for less cost. But I don't think EPA is quite there yet.
That was that article, the Cleaner Water Act. Yep, same exact, you're right. All right, well, thank you very much for your time.
And thank you all. Yes, yes. Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here and appreciate all that information. And that concludes our work session. one at 7.
Just make sure it switches over.
You want to start? When you're waiting, it could be a long time, like boiled. Good evening, citizens and staff. I'm Mayor Carol Westfall, hereby call to order this council meeting on Monday, June 7th, 2021, to 7 p.m. Roll call, please.
Counselor Tolfall? Here. Counselor Schoenberg?
Here.
Counselor Dodson?
Here.
Counselor Blaine? Here. Counselor Andres?
Here.
Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. We have a proclamation today. If Nikki, would you like to come up? And Chris Stromberg, come to the podium. I really appreciate you doing this. The City of Klamath Falls, Oregon has a proclamation, June 15th, 2021, on the matter proclaiming Elder Abuse Awareness Day in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Whereas thousands of vulnerable seniors and people with disabilities are victimized every year by financial exploitation, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse and neglect. Whereas elder abuse happens to men and women of all income levels, all cultural, ethnic groups, whether they are in good health or incapacitated in some way, or in poor neighborhoods or suburbia. Whereas these incidents of abuse and neglect take place in the home and in facilities are perpetrated by family members, friends, caregivers, and strangers. Whereas elder abuse is grossly underreported because the elderly who are being abused find it very difficult to tell anyone and are usually ashamed and sometimes afraid. Whereas signs of animal abuse and neglect are an early warning sign of seniors' needs for assistance. All citizens are encouraged to work together in reporting animal cruelty for the welfare and safety of our vulnerable seniors and people with disabilities. Whereas the Oregon law enforcement community, adult protective service staff, and advocates have forged a stronger working relationship through their community-based multidisciplinary teams to prevent and prosecute abuse and neglect, whereas Oregonians need to be better informed on preventative measures and the indicators of abuse and neglect. And therefore, let it be proclaimed by Mayor and City Council members that June 15th, 2021 is designated as Elder Abuse Awareness Day. In Klamath Falls, Oregon, we encourage all citizens of the City of Klamath Falls to unite as a community to support our aging citizens and people with disabilities, done and dated the 7th day of June 2021, signed by the City of Klamath Falls Mayor Carol Westfall. And if you would like, Nikki, you can say, or Chris, you can say a few words.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor Westfall, for recognizing that in the council. This is an important day for elder abuse just because it brings a little bit of awareness to our communities. We're doing an event on June 15th at the Senior Center. It's going to be from 11 to 2, and we're just going to have a small lunch and within our, COVID parameters, and some providers that are going to have information for our older community. But it's just an attempt to bring a little more awareness. In addition, this year we're partnering with the Klamath County Sheriff's Office and our KCC Criminal Justice Program to kind of target a younger population of people in attempts to bring awareness to, children and grandchildren, and not just the older adults about how to protect themselves, but to their family members, so that they can watch for the signs and look for those things that might be red flags. So we're kind of hoping that campaign works a little bit better this year, and so we're thankful to be here and thankful to be at the county and thankful to do our event, so thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Nicole will take that down.
Thanks, Nicole. Thank you again.
Thank you now.
And thanks for wearing your ribbon.
Oh, thank you. Public comment? We'll now open up for public comment. Anybody wishing to come up and speak on anything that's not on the agenda can come up to the podium. We'll give you 3 minutes. And we have somebody that's signed up, Dennis Utley.
Chair and City Council. I'm Dennis Utley. I'm with Access Taxi and Basin Delivery. There's an individual rolling around town, following my taxis around town, stealing their fares, actually rolling up to their fares and asked them for cheaper prices. And my understanding, they don't have a license to do so in this city. And I've taken it to KFPD, code enforcement, and he's still doing it. And I don't know where else to go. All the drivers have asked me to do something about it. And so this is the next place I thought to go of, and that's why I'm here today.
Very good. Go ahead, City Manager.
I'll give you my contact if you could give me a call, and then staff, we can try and figure out what we can do on that.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much.
Anybody else wishing to speak on anything that's not on the agenda? City Manager, is there anybody online?
No.
Okay. And seeing and hearing nobody else, we're going to close that out. Consent agenda. 5.1, the approval of consent agenda, meeting agenda, and items 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4. 5.2, support Ross Ragland's kids with city sponsorship. 5.3, wastewater treatment plant project update information. And 5.4, budget, period budget analysis report for 2019-2021 biennial budget.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Number 6, a general public hearing. 6.1, a liquor license recommendation for on-premise sales and permit for the alcohol consumption along with the public sidewalk for the Mermaid Cafe, Garden Cafe, located at 501 Main Street, Suite 101. And we have Planning Manager Joe Wall reviewing.
Good evening, everybody. I don't know if that's going to go off in a minute or so, but
Oh,
from
sorry.
the public comment,
Oh, stop.
the NBA shot clock, or I should just make it quick. Sorry, guys.
I think this is for you, Joe.
So in front of us this evening, I think all of us are familiar with the downtown kind of longtime restaurant establishment, Mermaid Garden Cafe. If you've noticed recently driving down the street, there has been what we call a pedlet installed in front of it, a space that really allows us to enjoy outdoors seasonally, summertime, and use sidewalk space. So get people outside, activate the street, and I know we have the proprietors here, so I hope it's been a success so far and throughout the remainder of the summer. I have additional staff here that could probably shed a little bit more light on the pedlet effort, but I know it was pretty encompassing as far as a grant with help of Blue Zones. It's a pretty professionally fabricated piece, which I think is nice. We've received a lot of different requests for, I'll say, a little bit more hodgepodge accommodation, so it was kind of nice to see something that actually functions and allows pedestrians to bypass the space. But with that, little bit of a unique request here. We do a number of liquor license recommendations to OLCC, so that is what we have this evening as well. So we have a limited liquor license recommendation, so that's for everything with the exception of hard liquor spirits. And then what we're doing as well here, city code does not allow the consumption of alcohol within any public spaces. And the city code section lists out a number of spots. I think it's parks, cemeteries, rights of way, etc. So what we are proposing here is that the limited liquor license would correspond with the outdoor space as delineated within the diagram shown on the visual here as well. This space coincides and really is only valid for when an encroachment permit is in place. So there is an encroachment permit that has been permitted through city engineering for the placement of the pedlet for those summer months. I know there's probably some ideas out there. As of right now, I think Mermaid Garden typically operates during lunchtime hours, Monday through Friday, but there has been discussion about additional business opportunities and perhaps expanding into the evening. I do want to be a little careful, and we had the conversation with police department as well. We recognize this is a bit of a pilot. We really haven't done anything like this before, but we feel very strong with Mermaid Garden Cafe in this instance. The fact that it's limited on premises, it's not to be age restricted at any time, and then we're looking at hours as well. So I do think we'll probably need to evaluate this as hoping this is a success and perhaps more people come in. But with that, what we're looking to do is recommendation to OLCC for limited on-premises sales, and then with that, grant City Council's permission, staff's recommendation for that front portion of Main Street sidewalk as well. So happy to answer any questions. We have the business proprietors here. I know Darren and Scott with KFDA have been very, very involved with the Pedlet program, so any questions council may have.
Councilman Topol.
Well, I like to say, it looks very nice. I'm impressed. So, and then if council doesn't have any objections, I move the council approve
We have to have a
option one.
public hearing. We have to hold a public hearing.
We have to have a public hearing first.
Sorry.
So just before that, are you done, Joe?
I'll make myself available to anyone else.
Okay. I'll open it for public hearing. Anybody wishing to speak on this?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Darren Rutledge with the Klamath Falls Downtown Association. As Mr. Wall mentioned, we've been sort of intimately involved in this process, as well as several other businesses who are either providing outdoor seating or would like to at some point, especially during the summer months. We're 100% behind it. We realize that, it could certainly easily get out of control, but we think we've gotten ahead of that with some of the plans that particularly Scott and I have been working on to set these up in the right way so that they're used appropriately and that we don't have any problems. So we urge you to approve this one. I'm certain, working with Kelly and Chad, that it's going to work out great and hopefully will lead to some more of this. We love not only giving businesses a leg up, but also, as you can see here, activating public spaces is a great thing for our downtown. Thank you.
I've got a question. Are those seasonal, or do they stay up all year
Yes,
round?
they'll be seasonal.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, you can't plow around it, so
Yeah.
Scott says we have to move them.
Okay.
And Mark, I don't know if Mark's still here, but Mark says we have to move them.
Yeah.
so.
And were you seeing if anybody else wanted them? I mean, this was sort of a test?
We have been in conversation with a couple of other businesses, one in particular who's probably this close to being ready to go with something. Not sure if it would be sort of a business-provided pedlet or one of the city-sponsored pedlets or some other arrangement, but I don't know if you've been downtown recently. Lots of tables outside right now, so we've gotten those folks with the limited sidewalk use agreements. We're getting those in place so that they're sort of on record. Again, we want to make sure that these are done appropriately. They're not encroaching too much on public space, ADA passage, all of those things. So.
And what about the parking? Have you noticed, is the parking, are you losing like 3 spots?
So this one here is only taking up 1 spot, right, Scott? Yep. Yeah, okay, so we didn't have to move into the second space. I don't know if you can tell, but that far end is in a yellow zone. So we were able to move it up closer to the intersection, so it's only taking up 1 spot. This particular unit, again, depending on location, would normally probably take up 2 spots. Yeah. I haven't heard any complaints, other than the normal complaints, about our lack of parking.
Right.
But as I've said before and I'll say again, I don't think we have a parking problem. I think we have a walking problem. So,
Yeah.
yep.
Well, it's wonderful. I really appreciate it. And it looks so nice with the
Yeah.
little umbrellas there.
Well, kudos to Blue Zones Project. Scott was the brains behind this, and of course, S&S Manufacturing did a fantastic job putting it together. So, seems to be working out awesome.
Excellent.
All right.
Very
Thank you.
good. Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I'm just excited to see that there's something happening after 5 p.m. downtown. I drove through downtown on Saturday morning and just to see everybody at the market and to see people walking around it made it vibrant. It made it feel vibrant.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have something after 5 p.m., if that's, something till 9 or things like that, and make it a little bit more vibrant after everyone leaves from work, I think that's a plus.
Very good. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I'm Kelly. I'm the owner of Mermaid. Hi, Todd. I have been more nervous than I have for 15 years since we opened up the Mermaid just for this thing. And Chad, my husband, has been coming in and helping me pull tables out and pull them back in every day. I can't promise that I'm going to be open till 9. I'd like to try a limited menu after 2:30 because my normal hour ends at 2:30. So I'd like to try a limited menu with limited beer and wine for just like a little happy hour or something. And I might just try, like Kelsey from Blue Zone suggested, just try 2 nights a week and see how that goes. And then just expand from there and see
Right.
where it takes you. But already, just with what Scott and Darren have helped me with, and Kelsey, we feel so lucky and blessed. It's brought in a lot of customers, a lot of tourists. They drive down the street and they see the tables and the umbrellas, and they really like it, and they think Klamath Falls looks good because of it. And I've ordered 2 half umbrellas to put up against the building.
Oh.
It's just been a lot of fun for us. Makes me a little nervous, but it's fun.
It'll work. Your food's delicious.
Thanks,
And
Carol.
thank you for the opportunity as well. And we have
Yeah.
had nothing but positive comments the whole time this pilot has been going on.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Nice. It's been really fun. We
Good.
feel really lucky and blessed.
Oh, good. Well, we're blessed as well.
Good
Thank
job.
you. Okay, anybody else for public? Okay, I'll close that out. Now you can go ahead and do that.
Actually,
Just one moment.
sorry,
one
I came
more.
up with questions sit through all that.
Go ahead,
So,
Council Todson.
I guess just the way I feel like this is flushing out, if a business has set tables out, we wouldn't be able to give them this similar permit unless they've got basically a ped let around? Is that the,
Yeah, let me-
like, what's the threshold here for the next one?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so the reason we're formalizing, great, right? The reason we're formalizing this tonight the way we are is because, as we understand it, the OLCC rule that's in place is considered a temporary rule, which allows the automatic expansion into either the public right-of-way or onto private property that immediately is adjacent to properties. So what we did at the last meeting, if you recall, when I was here, we came up with the concept of basically do what we need to do to keep businesses in place while we're under these tight restrictions. So the draft letter that we've written that Darren was referring to regarding the existing facilities that are downtown specifically states that they're allowed to do the alcohol serving as long as they're limited under the current governor's regulations that are limiting indoor seating. The intent to that is when those regulations are lifted, that allowed use of the alcohol within the public right-of-way would go away, and people would need to formally go through this sort of a process if they want to continue to serve. That this is the concept, and I think it's a great question because it's a good thing to talk about. So what we're doing here on this one, we're formalizing the delineation. Again, this is a pilot project, so I'm working with the fabricator right now to finish the rest of the pilot, which is the delineation along the sidewalk, because that's not there right now. But before she starts doing the serving part and gets through the OLCC process, we'll make sure that that delineation is in there. The idea is that we will formally delineate the spaces that then could serve, okay? Once the OLCC thing lifts, Darren and I are working on all these temporary approvals. once the OLCC things lifts, we're intending with your support to allow the on-sidewalk usage still, as long as we can maintain, I think what we've talked about doing is limiting it to within 4 feet of the front of the building, so those people that have been doing it traditionally, like Mermaid was previously, and Daily Bagel has been, they had tables and chairs out. None of that's really been formally approved, it's sort of just been overlooked. We're getting more of it, so we need to put something in place where people have permission to do so. So the concept would be that we would develop a program where we would allow people to use the sidewalk as long as they don't impede more than 4 feet, which still allows 6 or 7 feet remaining. And in those situations, I don't think we would allow alcohol unless they were able to do a formal delineation to segregate that space as part of the building. Is that kind of making sense to everybody? And now's a good time to kind of know if you guys are in support of us continuing, because we're spending a lot of time and effort trying to talk to businesses. We put the thing out there last time. I haven't signed a single letter yet. Everybody went and did it, but Darren's been going around trying to get people to come in and talk to us so we can formalize it. But we need to have some level of control on that. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Just because I could see, right, as soon as somebody walks by and sees it, they're like, oh, me too.
I'd like to stay on the alcohol service as long as OLCC with the rest of them don't have any major issues, so I don't know whether I would.
But it's
Because I've been
temporary.
in other cities where they serve alcohol outside beer and wine.
Correct.
I don't think they'll be part of it.
Counselor Andrews?
Yeah, I think the challenge with that is if you don't delineate it, and you're walking down the street and a police officer has to engage them, it's hard to track it back to the store that overserved, potentially. So I think that's why they kind of try to keep it in these delineated areas. So I think that's the concept.
If I might as well, the business has the right to serve unless they have an off-premise right. They're serving on their premise. So we need to delineate, most of our restaurants just have on-premise.
Right.
So you would delineate, which is one of the things we've talked about. In a lot of the cities you see that, there might be either decorative fencing or something else that's delineating, here is this restaurant's space, but people don't take that drink off. Now, you've been other places where they do. I've been to Nashville. I don't think they have any rules in Nashville, but
yeah,
right. It's just so in Oregon we do have. We would need to delineate a little bit.
Could you pull this image back up?
Yeah, let me.
So I sketched this image up.
Sorry,
to
the
help.
mouse is really slow.
In this particular case, because you're right, the current OLCC temporary rule is pretty vague, and they're allowing this. So we're trying to, the diagonal hatch there with the number 4 in it, we're like designating that we're allowing that to be considered their expanded restaurant use square footage with cross sidewalk delineation for exactly those reasons we're talking about. And we're really wanting to do this sort of in a maybe baby steps, if you will, to get somewhere before we get there too fast and then kill the whole thing, which is why I think this applicant is a perfect situation for this. We also through discussion at staff level talked about the 9 p.m. cutoff as a starting point. I would be cautious to just say we're just going to open it up to every bar and restaurant in the downtown, and even delineate it or not at a certain time frame. Maybe some uses change or the way that people act changes, and we wanted to try to control that. We can open that up later, but taking it back would be more difficult. So that was our thought process, but again, throwing that out there to you guys, we're trying to do this systematically and not lose the whole effort that we've been putting towards it.
I wonder if Chief has anything to say on that, that you could help us with there.
Yeah, we're definitely in favor of the time frame. The clientele definitely changes the later the evening gets and the harder it is to control. So we're more than in favor for early evening hours.
Okay, and also just public drinking. How is that if somebody was to be drinking out there and walks off with their glass or anything? Is there going to be an issue, or?
Well, they have 200 feet, I believe the code says 200 feet, 200 feet from the place that they're drinking. So like if your house, it says you have 200 feet you can walk before you can be cited.
Okay,
So,
great, good. Any other question of Chief
What's that?
for anybody?
okay. Yeah, 200 feet from a resident. It has to, for, Mr. Swanson said for the business, it would have to be maintained in the designated area.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And just for clarification, to follow up on what Chief said, and that's because this area is within the right-of-way and, you know, the sidewalk, et cetera, so it is specifically excluded by our ordinance, and that's why we're kind of taking that extra step. Sure, OLCC said they can expand out, but it is important to make sure that the council is aware of it to grant a permit as permitted under 5.438.
Okay.
And if I could just follow up one more on that question,
Sure.
that, I think that's one of the importances of the delineation, because again, it's really no different than if they're technically in the restaurant. We're trying to activate the outdoor open space, so if it's delineated, it'd really be no different than if they were leaving the restaurant. In that particular case was kind of our
Good.
mindset on
Good.
that.
Okay, any other question? Comment?
No, I'm tired now.
Come on, Dan.
I move the council authorize option 1.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Thank you. 6.2, a resolution adopting a supplemental budget for the biennial budget period 2019-2021 with a Lakefront Urban Renewal Fund. We have Finance Director Jessica Lindsay.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The revenue for Lakefront Urban Renewal for the property taxes came in higher than we anticipated. That's unfortunately one of the downfalls with doing a biennial budget. I love it, don't get me wrong, it saves a lot of time. But trying to predict out, we don't always make the best estimates. And luckily, this is a good thing. I think DHS, that building and just some of the values down there have increased, which increased our property tax. So we have revenue coming in, and then we'll apply that revenue to debt service so they can make a larger debt service payment.
Any questions?
Comment.
Councilman Andrews.
You never need to come and apologize for extra revenue.
Okay, good to know.
Okay, just
All right.
thanks.
Anybody else? Questions? Comments? Thank you. The public hearing. So anybody that needs to, would like to comment on this, can come up to the podium. And seeing and hearing nobody, we'll close that. Go ahead.
I'll move to introduce the resolution and read by title only.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Please read by title.
A resolution adopting a supplemental budget for the biennial budget period 2019 through 2021 within the Lakefront Urban Renewal Fund.
I move to approve the resolution.
Roll call, please.
Counselor Stoffel?
Yes.
Counselor Sternberg?
Yes.
Counselor Dodson?
Yes.
Counselor Blank?
Yes.
Counselor Andres?
Yes.
Other matters. Anybody wishing to speak on other matters? City Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, Mayor, I had sent you some paperwork as a follow-up on the Rose Street issue that came up recently, and I would just ask for some direction on that. Would you want it back onto the agenda for next time to give the parties an opportunity to address council? Do you want to take other action? I just need to know how we want to finalize this situation.
Start with Councilor Andrews.
I think it'd be proper to definitely give the individual an opportunity to speak to council. So I would recommend it come back on agenda item.
Councilor Dodson. Councilor Toffel.
Wasn't one of the issues whether we, the city, wanted to initiate?
Correct. There were a couple of different issues out there.
I don't think we
Okay?
That's my position.
Counselor Studenberg
I'd like to give him another chance to come address the council.
and Counselor Blaine.
I would not like to see it as an agenda item. There is a public comment period inside for them to do that also.
Okay.
I don't,
I-
I feel like that's too much of a hearing.
Well, I'll speak up then.
Counselor
There's a
Johnson.
process.
Yeah.
They're free to use it. I don't think we need to be making a special case. Nothing's been applied for. I don't see this.
Correct. Staff
manager.
did provide the application to Mr. Ackling, so he can start that formal process. So far, the only thing we've ever received is a fence permit, which we said we needed an additional. So he has the application both for a vacation, and he has talked to staff on what he needs to do to apply for that encroachment, changing that encroachment permit. We just haven't received anything.
Yeah, and I'm not comfortable circumventing that process. So
I'm wondering if this shouldn't have gone to planning. Could planning have?
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one part of it, but the other part is because it was made at a council level, really it should come back to council to follow up on it.
Okay.
So do you feel clear on
The understanding that I have from the majority is to take no action at this time, and that if Mr. Ackling wishes to address council, he can come before council during our public comment time. I believe that was the underlying concern. That is one process. Another process would be that he can formally apply for a vacation, but the ball is most firmly in his court at this time.
The only additional thing I would like to ask, who is going to communicate that to him?
Well, that would be the follow-up question, and if council was to direct me to prepare a letter or take no action, I mean, that's, again, it's up to council and how we wish to communicate this.
Personally, I think just leaving it here and then him not hearing back from us at all when he was here for a meeting is probably not the best public relations that we should take. Now, if I can completely agree with what council's decision is. I just think we need to get back to him and say, these are your options. You can come and talk to us in front of a public hearing. You can make an application. Until that happens, nothing else is going to go on.
Forgive me, a public comment as opposed to public hearing?
Public comment, thank you.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I think a formal letter, though, so he knows his options, because when they do public comment, we're not going to do an action at that point, are we? No, we wouldn't. So I really think if he knows his options, and then he can come and speak, but at least he would have his options. That would be my thought. Councilor Blaine.
The only issue I have with that, and you can tell me what you think about this, Mr. Swanson, but I don't like the idea of saying these are our options, and then later he comes back and says you laid it out, and now we didn't do X, Y, Z, or you didn't follow these. So it gives me a little bit of heartburn, but that's coming from the
That was, you anticipated a bit of a follow-up question that I had, because yes, we want to communicate with them, but we need to be careful so that he doesn't feel as though he's, because I think that's what happened in the past, is I believe that it was expressed in such a way, if you do X, Y, and Z, then this will follow, but it was, if you do X, Y, and Z, this will be considered versus this will follow, if that makes sense.
I think something more informal from planning, reaching out to, is that who he's been working with, correct? And reaching out to him, and I don't know, but that's, putting it in writing is giving me heartburn.
I'm happy to defer to planning on this.
Okay. That works for me.
No, your development.
How about-
He's planning, your development.
Well,
aren't you?
how about, I have had the most conversation with him in my office, then he went to Nathan. I could call him and just summarize what you're saying in a phone call. that's, I don't, Nathan, you were starting to say something.
Does that sound, does that sound better?
He needs to hear back.
Yeah, I think-
Right.
I agree.
I think that's important.
And I was just saying, we just need to communicate back to him. I did let him know that somebody would be in touch with him once Mike had reported back, so we can figure that out. I think probably we do it via phone, and then we'll memorialize that with an email back to him, just so that there's a record.
Another,
Or this could be the
another
last
one.
thing that Nathan does for the city.
I'm happy to do it too. We've had multiple conversations, he and I, and so I'd be happy to take that on as well.
That sounds better, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
We'll work it. Oh, you want to do it? Okay.
We'll talk about what it'll say, but I'll do it.
I think.
All right, good deal.
Very appropriate. Anybody else? Okay.
Move to adjourn?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting is adjourned.